Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During today's presentation, there will be some question and answer sessions. At that time, to ask your questions, you press star and 1 on your touch-tone phone. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to introduce your host for today's conference. We have Mr. Leland Milstein. Sir, you may begin.
Great. Thank you very much, Lori. My name is Leland, and I am filling in for Jared, who's out today. This, as you know, is the third Thursday webcast series. It's a monthly webcast held at the lunch hour. And the trainings leverage local successes by amplifying to a larger audience 2 model organizations' methods, materials, and approaches. Sessions are planned to last no more than 1 hour, with 2 presenters speaking on the same topic from slightly different perspectives, each for 10 to 15 minutes, followed by 10 to 15 minutes of questions and answers. This session is approved by the ISA for 1 CEU hour and by SAF for 1 CFE Category 1. If you have not already given me your certification number or sent that to Jared, please email that this afternoon to jared@actrees.org. Alternatively, most state landscape architecture boards require only a certificate of completion, which we, ACT, can provide to members who request it. This is a program of the Alliance for Community Trees. We would love to have you as a member, so please consider joining if you are not already. I would like to thank the Home Depot Foundation as a major sponsor and the USDA Forest Service for helping make this webcast series a reality. Today, our topic is urban landscaping, Part 1, Bareroot trees. There will be a Part 2, so we hope you'll all attend that. Bareroot trees with Nina and Patrice as our presenters. A best management practice that is increasingly moving from research to the field is Bareroot planting. Whether from a nursery field to the city street or just from one place in your yard to another, it's the roots that suffer when trees are transplanted. Consider this. Shade tree roots are found primarily in the top 12 inches of soil. Tiny absorbing roots, responsible for most of the tree's intake of water and nutrients, grow horizontally not only up to the drip line, but also beyond it. In fact, there's often a higher percentage of absorbing roots beyond the drip line than within it. An unbelievable 90% of tree roots are routinely left behind in the nursery at the time of harvest. In an industry where having a viable root system is the primary determining factor of whether trees survive and thrive in their new location, current practices must be reevaluated. First presenter who's going to talk about this somewhat controversial topic is Nina Basic, a professor and program leader of the Urban Horticulture Institute at Cornell University and co-author of Trees in the Urban Landscape. A native New Yorker, her work focuses on the psychological problems of plants growing in urban environments, including improved plant selections for difficult sites, soil modification, including the development of CU structural soil, and improved transplanting technology. Nina is a recipient of the Gold Medal of Horticulture from the New York State Nursery and Landscape Association. Nina?
Hi, Nina. Thanks very much. I will say that it's not the psychological problems of plants, but probably the physiological problems.
Oh, sorry
of
about
plants.
that. Physiological
That's okay. That gives everybody a laugh. Yeah, I've been working with Bareroot trees for probably since 1991, and in my role here at Cornell, I do research on the problems of growing trees in urban areas, but I also wear another hat, being that of the chair of the Shade Tree Committee in Ithaca, New York, and kind of use Ithaca, the city of Ithaca, as my downtown lab. And so as the city was doing cutbacks in the early 90s, the monies to buy trees just weren't there, so we thought about going to an old method, which is an ancient method. We're using Bareroot transplanting, which is much less expensive than the more typical ball and burlap tree planting method. So since 1991, we've been working on this, and what you see in the first slide here is a bulletin that's come out of the work that we've done, so I just wanted to make sure you had this resource. The website is there, and it'll be at the last slide as well. And you can download a booklet for free describing the trees that we think do well Bareroot and not, and the method we've been using. But let's go on and see what we've been working on. So here's a Bareroot tree, and only certain nurseries do transplant trees or produce trees that can be transplanted of bare root. So we work with those nurseries that are happy to do that. And the most obvious thing is that you don't have a whole lot of soil around the roots, and that's both the liability of this method too, is that the roots can dry out if they're not taken care of. So here we have a lightweight tree, which is less expensive, but the liability being the roots could dry out. And the nurseries that we work with often have what's called a U-blade, a kind of special digger that enables us to really get a large root system. As Leila mentioned, often, in typical transplanting, as many as 90% of the roots might be left behind. With a U-blade digger, we can actually get a lot more roots this way. And depending on the soil type of the nursery, this works very well. Here you see the blade being mounted on a tractor, and then it's basically going to go into the ground, and kind of this U is going to come out the other end, and we're getting quite a big root system on this tree. Here it is going underneath the tree, and then nursery professionals must be holding the tree as the blade comes up. We end up with this pretty good root system, and this is a fairly small, this is 1.5 inch caliper tree, and you see a pretty good root system. Now we wanted to look at a number of aspects of handling these trees so that we get them back to the city safely without drying out the roots, and we've worked on a number of different aspects of doing this. Well, here you typically see the more typical tree spade for digging B&B, balled and burlap trees, where you have a mechanical digger going in the ground, and then you see the more typical basket and balled and burlap tree ball, which for even a 1.5 inch caliber tree probably weighs 150 to 250 pounds. So it's a huge weight difference, and that comes into the cost and the shipping issue. But the advantage, of course, is that the roots are surrounded by soil and have more potential for, less potential for drying out. So what we did is actually we harvested the same species and caliper tree, both with a typical tree digger tree spade on the left, as you see, and the right was the U-blade going in and basically harvesting the tree bare root. We did the left tree is one was done bare, balled and burlap, but then we took the soil off to see just what were the roots in that ball of soil. So you can see that there are many, many less roots that are harvested with a tree spade on the left than there are with a U-blade on the right. And this is the same species, and probably a red maple, very fibrous root system with about a 1.5 inch caliper tree. So this is, we thought it was a great advantage. We get, in fact, about 200% more root using a U-blade than a tree spade. And we started, again, we still had the issue, though, of, although we had more root system, we still had the issue of preventing those roots from drying out. So here you see our city forester from Ithaca taking a bare root tree. We'd go up to the nursery and dipping the root system in a slurry of hydrogel. You can see the root system there being coated with a hydrogel. Hydrogels are inert substances which hold about 300 to 500 times their weight in water, and they're used for many industrial uses, but they also basically provide a reservoir of water around the root system and keep that root system from drying out. So after we dipped we did quite a bit of work trying to figure out what was the best grind size for this so that the hydrogel would adhere to all the roots and we wouldn't lose any in the transplanting process. So we dipped the Bareroot tree in hydrogel, and then it is placed in a large pleated plastic bag which just ties on itself, and then we take the tree and put it in our truck, so we can get almost several hundred trees this way on a truck. That's a big advantage over balled and burlap, so shipping is much less expensive. And they're very lightweight. So when of these trees probably weighs about 25 to 30 pounds, as opposed to 150 to 250 balled and burlap of the same size. So we go to the nursery, we dip and bag and bring them home, and then we have about 2 weeks of holding time. We keep them cool. We don't let them leaf out. We keep them in a cool, basically a garage or a shed where we don't have to water them. With just the hydrogel is keeping those roots moist. It gives us about a 2-week window, although we tend to try to get them in the ground within the first week. And we have willing volunteers who help us plant, and these are some of my students. They volunteer to plant. We often plant in the fall. We plant both fall and spring. We've done quite a bit of research to see, the conventional wisdom is that spring planting is better, bare root, but we found just the opposite to be true, that fall planting actually gives you better growth the next spring than spring planting. So we plant about the second week of November. We will get our bare root trees. They'll be dipped and bagged and stored until we have, within a week's time, we'll be planting them. And you can see the fact that they're lightweight and they go very easily to the site. So here we have our bare root planting session here. You can see there's students, and they're digging the holes for the trees. They're making sure the trees are plumb, that they're at the right level in the soil. It's a bit of a technique for planting bare root, since the roots are fairly stiff. The large roots are, in fact, you have to get the soil in between those roots in a really good contact. So we do have the students actually use the back end of the shovel, and as the soil is put into the tree hole, back ends of the shovel are basically pushing the soil between those buttress roots to get good soil-root contact, and making sure that the tree is standing up straight on both angles, and so we're getting a good, well-planted tree. We also make sure that we're not planting too deep. That's the really advantage of bare root planting. Very often with B&B, you don't necessarily see the connection between the root flare and the trunk. We obviously see that very easily with bare root trees, and we can make sure we're planting at the right level, and not often you can be 6 or 10 inches too deep if that root flare is not seen. So that's a good advantage. We dig a nice wide hole, make sure it's at the right level, and then start backfilling with the native soil we've taken out. There's a little graph showing some of the work we've done, comparing the growth of balled and burlap trees, bare root trees that had not been dipped in hydrogel, and on the right-hand side, bare root trees that had been dipped. And the red column is fall planted, and the green column is spring planted. So you can see we're looking at the amount of growth in centimeters that first year, and balled and burlap getting anywhere from 9 to 12 centimeters of new growth, and spring tends to be better. With bare root, you have a much reduced new growth in the following year if you don't dip it, don't keep those roots moist. But when we keep the roots moist with a dip, we actually get comparable, if not slightly better, new growth in the spring and fall. Actually, fall, that red column shows we actually have superior new growth the following spring when we plant in the previous fall. And underneath those columns, it says N equals 932. That means there were 932 trees planted in the fall, and 548 plants planted in the spring, and then we're looking at the new growth afterwards. So we're not just talking about 5 or 6 trees. This is experience over a decade or more. So we really do believe that fall planting, we're in upstate New York, in about the second week of November, gives you better growth the following spring. So again, happy people planting trees. Everybody loves to plant trees. It's important that we site them correctly and making sure they're going to the right spot for those species. And then, of course, aftercare is important. We mulch every new tree with just chips that city produces, and we try to get a tree gator on them to make sure they get 1 year of supplemental watering when we need it to do that, so that when it's dry, we'll get watered once a week with 20 gallons in a tree irrigator bag, as you see here. And this is a row of accolade elms planted 5 years ago. They're originally 1.5-inch caliper. They're now about 3 or 4-inch caliper, and they're doing very, very well on the street. And typically we plant most of our street trees bare root in the fall. We do some things in the spring, B&B, that don't do well bare root. But some of these hybrid elms do really well. So some advantages, it's about 30 to 50% less expensive using bare root than B&B. Again, the weight is a lot less heavy, 25 to 30 pounds versus 150 to 300 pounds for B&B. Can be planted by volunteers without heavy machinery, up to 200% more root. It's harvested using a U-blade versus a tree spade. It's easy to plant at the right depth, and there's no soil textural interface between the soil from the nursery and the soil on site. The disadvantages and cautions, I mean, roots can dry out without adequate care. We've only worked with small sizes. We basically even no more than 2-inch caliber, 1.5 to 2-inch caliber trees. After that, it becomes so heavy, the tree itself, it's not possible to plant with volunteers. Species differences still confound generalities. Some species work well with this and other species don't, and that's one of the reasons I have that brochure to download if you want to look at. We have lists of those trees that are basically easy to transplant bare root, those that are moderately difficult, and those that you should never try because they just are going to be very difficult to plant bare root. Not that the aftercare is different, it's just the physiology of the tree itself makes it more difficult to plant bare root. There's also a small window of transplanting opportunity. Just we do it when the tree is dormant, so when the nurseries start digging very late October to basically the month of November in the fall. In the spring, we don't do bare root in the spring in Ithaca, as I mentioned, but it can be done late March to month of April, depending where you are. One of the problems in the spring is that some species leaf out very readily, like syringas or crab apples, and we don't want them to be in leaf when we transplant them. So that's not a problem when we transplant in the fall. And we found that the volume of roots, although we see that we get more roots, they're not quite as important as maybe the quality of the roots transplanted. That sometimes we still have problems getting plants to do well, even when they have a lot more root than those in the B&B. So this is gets into some of our continuing research on why some plants transplant well this way and some plants don't. But we do have a large list of those that do very well. So just to end with that booklet again, I hope that if you're interested, you look at that. It's has a lot of research and a lot of lists of information that might give you some more things to think about. So I'll leave it there.
All right. Well, thank you, Nina. What we want to do now is open the floor up for questions for Nina. And Lori, the operator, will be able to take your calls and open it up for that.
Thank you so much. If you would like to ask a question, please press star then 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please be sure to unmute your phone. Record your name when prompted. I will need your name in order to introduce that question. If you need to withdraw your request, you press star 2. Once again, it's just star then 1. One moment for the first question.
And I would also like to say that you can also type your questions in under the Q&A button if you want to type those to me, and then I can ask them over the phone. While people are formulating their questions or thinking about what they want to ask, I do have a question for Nina. First off, I was wondering if you could explain a little bit, or if we know why B&B trees do better than bare root trees in the spring rather than the fall. If there's what the seasonal difference is about.
It's not clear, but one of the things we're thinking about is that even with less root that gets transplanted, when plants start to break bud in the spring, there already is a kind of very intimate root soil contact, and so there's no break of roots getting water than they might be doing in why it's better in the spring or fall is really not known, but just having that intimate root soil contact gives the plants we're not messing up any root hairs or fine roots in the process of digging them. And that's some of the reason why we think sometimes trees do better with balled and burlap than bare root.
All right. Lori, do we have any calls in the queue or questions in the queue?
Yes, sir. We do have a question from Roger Hunt. Your line is open, sir.
Yes, good morning. I was wondering how you take the soil off of the roots. Do you use water to take it off, or what's the process there to get the soil from around the roots?
Well, that's a good question. We work with nurseries who have gravelly, well-draining soils, and when the dew blade comes underneath the root system, the plant is basically shaken and the soil falls off. Now, if you have a really heavy clay soil, that's not going to work as well. But many of the nurseries that we work with have very gravelly, sandy soils that basically, with a little bit of shaking, that the soil just falls off the roots.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'm going to ask a question from the typed-in one. One of the questions is asking, Nina, if you can address the constraints of bare root planting in heavy clay soil, the size of the hole dug by volunteers, getting the soil root contact.
Well, yeah, this is important to plant trees well. We needn't talk about really the transplanting part. If the soil that you're putting the plant in is really not suitable for planting, you need to address that first. You may need to amend, you may need to break it up and not just plant a hole in the ground, but prepare a site so that you're loosening up some of that really compacted soil. If it's just clay soil, which may not be compacted but just heavy, it's just important to dig a really wide tree hole so that you're accommodating all the roots, and then breaking up the backfill before it gets put back in. So you're not putting back clods, but putting back as fine a backfill as you can so you can cover all those roots and not have any big air pockets. So the basic issue would be to break up the backfill so it's fine enough so when you put it back in the hole, all the roots are covered.
All right. And does the operator have any more questions in the queue?
Yes, sir. We have another question from Guy Zimmerman. Your line is open.
The question is, have you ever played around with mycorrhiza to see if you have any increased growth when you plant?
We have not seen any increased growth with adding mycorrhiza into the soils we have around here. We tend to find there's plenty of mycorrhiza in the soils, and it has not given us any benefit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm going to ask another question that's been typed in. This one is from James Koenig. Wondering if you have any comparison with containerized materials yet, and also a question about staking, and if staking after planting is much more important with the bare root method.
Yeah, containerized plant material, if the plant has been in the container for a number of years, you basically have the whole root system there, and that's an advantage, especially in really difficult to transplant trees. We would recommend containerized. Now, in the Northeast here, we tend to not grow trees, large trees, in containers. That happens more out in the West Coast, but we would get maybe possible to get a number 10 or what used to be called 10-gallon or 20-gallon size tree, and that would still be a pretty small tree. Also, again, the weight of that probably would be, be more expensive and more and difficult to deal with. But containerized trees, when you can get them, will transplant very readily as long as you can keep them well watered in that first year. In terms of staking, we don't stake trees routinely. The only reason we would stake a tree or stake a guy is if it had a large sail and a really small root system. So in Ithaca, where we plant maybe 200 Bareroot trees a year, we'd only stake and guy for only one season if it was in a particularly windy spot or right near the water where it's going to get a lot of wind. But most of the times we do not stake trees at all.
Great, thank you. Are there other questions that the operator has in queue?
I have no further questions at this time. If you'd like to ask a question, please press star 1.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask one more that's been typed in. And this is from Eric Berg. He's wondering, has the financial breakdown been done on Bareroot compared to B&B, financial comparison?
Well, if you're just talking about, there's several times when we haven't actually got exact numbers. We know that where we get our trees, they're about 30%. If you're getting the same caliper, same species, same cultivar, about 30% less expensive Bareroot than B&B. That's just buying the tree. Then what we find is a big advantage is shipping. It's when we're putting 100 trees in a truck versus maybe 30 B&B, so we have much less in terms of shipping, which is a big issue. And then when you get to planting, when you have a city crew doing B&B planting, they're using machinery, heavy machinery to lift the ball and so on most of the times. Otherwise, of course, it's a big advantage to use volunteers, where there's very little cost to plant the tree. So both in buying it, shipping it, and in planting it, we find there is an advantage financially. But sometimes we don't use Bareroot because the trees don't work well that way, or if we want to plant a larger caliper tree, so we have to weigh all these things, make the right choice.
Okay, thank you. So this has been a very engaging discussion. I know people out there have more questions, but we do want to move on so we can fit everything in and keep this within the hour. So please, I would encourage everyone to get in touch with Nina with your questions. She's clearly an expert and can provide you with great answers. What we're going to do now is move on to our next presenter. But first, thank you, Nina.
You're welcome.
Next up is Patrice Sheehan, who's the tree program manager at the Delaware Center for Horticulture. She coordinates lots of tree planting programs with volunteers throughout Wilmington, so maybe she can address the psychological aspect of trees. Patrice administers the Street Tree Program for the city of Wilmington, coordinates annual Arbor Day activities, maintains a database of tree resources, and helps communities secure funding for tree program initiatives. Her favorite part of her job is working with volunteers planting trees. She has worked as an ISA certified arborist for 12 years in New Jersey and Delaware. She's also certified by the International Society of Arboriculture as a municipal specialist. Originally from Australia, Patrice now lives in Pittman, New Jersey, where she enjoys gardening, water gardening, camping, traveling, and serving on the Pittman Environmental Commission. She holds a BS in Business Administration with a specialization in management from Rowan University and an AAS in Ornamental Horticulture from Cumberland County College. Patrice? Are you there, Patrice?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. Did you get my presentation up? Hopefully. Good, thank you. This is Patrice with the Delaware Center for Horticulture. Our organization is a nonprofit that works in public landscapes as well as community gardens. Educational programs are very important here also, as well as trees. Currently in Wilmington, our tree canopy cover is only 16%. And so we have set a goal with the Trees for Wilmington to plant 20,000 trees by the year 2020. The problem with this is that right now we average a little more than about 500 trees a year planting. Most of these are contractor planting, and it costs about $500 per tree to have a contractor plant them. So we have been looking for ways to plant more trees with less money, and we began with the Bareroot plantings in 2007. During the spring of 2007, we partnered with PHS, Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, and through them we purchased trees and dipped them. And as you can see, the cost for the trees are about $25 for one of these inch to inch and a half caliber trees. They're very lightweight for volunteers to be carrying, and DCH is very fortunate to have a dedicated group of volunteers who can help us on the delivery day to unload and dip and bag the trees. So Nina explained the operation of dipping the roots in the hydrogel. We do this immediately as soon as they're delivered so that the roots don't die out, and we certainly don't want dead trees. So once they're coated, we again put them in large bags and store them for about a week. We do try to get them planted during that week and keep them in a cool environment. As Nina explained, the trees, as you can see, are all dormant, and typically in Delaware we get a delivery in mid-March, and we've been doing spring and fall planting, so the fall planting is usually in early or mid-November. This is a really cool picture of an example of how large the root systems on these trees can be. This was actually a picture from this spring, and we were really excited about the size of these roots. And Nina has explained how that is a huge advantage for the tree. And here's some more pictures of the trees before dipping and after dipping in their little bags there. What I'm going to do is give you some live examples that from what we have done, and they're very realistic. We are still learning, but this was our first planting. We received money through a Neighborhoods grant and recruited volunteers from Home Depot stores, residents, Girl Scouts, tree stewards, and we have a training session prior to the actual tree planting day during the evening, and we have pizza, and we actually show Nina's video to help people understand this new to us way of planting trees. And it's a great way to engage people and make them feel like they're part of something bigger. So what we do on planting day, we always have a demonstration before everybody breaks off into groups. The groups consist of about 5 or 6 people, and we have an experienced leader who supervises each group. And we give them a map showing where the trees are going to go, and they'll plant about 6 or 7 trees each in the next couple of hours. We scheduled the plantings for Saturday mornings, and we have all the trees, stakes, mulch, gator bags distributed to the locations in advance. That way we won't have confusion of what tree goes where. This particular planting was pretty ambitious for our first time, included 5 different locations. So they were all within walking distance of the main site, which was a community center that had athletic fields. That's the top left picture there. So recently, this is 2 years later now, we just went back and reviewed how these trees were doing. So I'm going to share with you the results of this. One of the locations was design contracting, and this is in a fairly industrial area of the city, as you can see, but they had really good planting sites, and the property owner was willing to water and take care of the trees. So we planted 7 trees, and 6 of them survived. We planted 8 trees at a school, Marion T. Academy. As you can see, we had pretty poor survival rate there. Only 3.5 survived. I still have hope for that half. And part of the reason for this is because they actually closed down the school. The summer and the fall following this planting, it was in a fenced area that we couldn't get to get water to them. And so this is what happened with actually no care whatsoever as far as supplemental watering. So maybe looking at that, it's probably not too terrible. But then we get to the Kingswood Community Center, which was the main site where we planted the most trees. And this was a little bit discouraging to go back and look at it. The problem that was here was really the follow-up care and the poor maintenance practices of the lawn mowing and weed whacking, as well as vandalism issues. I'm not sure that we would have had terribly different results if they were container trees or B&B trees. It may have been exactly the same, but we didn't get very good survival rate there because really these trees were not mulched the second year. The trees immediately around the community building were watered and cared for, but not the ones that were further out in the fields. And also I think a lot of them were subject to vandalism because it's a highly used public area for summer programs and other athletic events. But because of that, we're going to follow up a little better with our tree care club and try to make sure we do remulch them so that hopefully they won't be damaged by the lawn mowing equipment operators. This was the other area that we did, Northeast Boulevard. You can see by the before picture at the top right, it's an industrial area. It's like a main entrance into the city, a lot of pedestrian traffic. I think we also got a lot of vandalism along this way because we actually paid for watering. There was no easy way for volunteers to water this. So we did pay for watering, but it really didn't help out a lot when you have people damaging the trees. And then this was the final location that we planted at our first planting, right across from the prison on kind of a traffic island area. 6 trees planted, 6 survived, and the main reason for that is because in one of the adjacent buildings we have recruited one of the contractors to pay one of their employees to water, and they also mowed this area and maintained it. So they were heavily invested in taking care of it, and they did a fabulous job. So we're pretty happy about that. So overall, the first time around, this is 2 years later, we have 42% survival. But don't be discouraged. That fall, we dipped our own trees. We had them delivered to our site, and we worked in 2 neighborhoods planting trees. The neighborhood on actually both of these pictures is East Lake, which is a new affordable housing community, and they built this really nice community but planted absolutely no trees. So it was a perfect place for us to go to civic association meetings, flyering the neighborhoods. We got requests from all the property owners to plant trees and they also participated in the planting. I think we would have had a much better survival rate if they had not decided to replace the curbing that the following spring, which they did, and in the process of ripping out the old curbing, they also ripped out all the trees. So considering that we had some issues with the poor trees being planted twice, I think we did pretty well, and we didn't actually get to them right away. Luckily, one of the local tree stewards helped to rescue some of the trees. This neighborhood also is a heavy traffic, pedestrian traffic area adjacent to a public swimming pool and an elementary school. So, you know, these small 1.5-inch caliper trees are easily damaged by kids or people, you know, just pulling on the branches, and I think that may also have been a factor. The other planting for the fall of 2007 was in Brandywine Hills. This is a wealthy neighborhood. The homeowners have been waiting for new trees, and they all came out and helped plant and learn how to care for them. And you can see we had a great survival rate for that neighborhood. So overall, we had almost 70% survival from our second Bareroot planting. So we're feeling a little better, and we're learning a little more about it as we go along. In the spring of 2008, we encouraged community members to apply for forestry grants to help pay for the Bareroot trees, because up until now we're kind of scrounging for money, you know, looking for grants to pay for the Bareroot trees. Even though they're not a lot of money, it's still a lot of work, and, you know, we do have to find the money also for all the supplies. Sometimes the supplies can cost as much as the trees. And with the urban and community forestry grants, they can use the volunteer hours as a match. So a community can virtually get their trees for free just by supplying a lot of volunteers, and that's easy to work up a lot of hours doing a project like this. And one of the successful applicants from this particular grant became our spring planting this past spring. We also decided that if we are going to increase our tree canopy, that we need to engage people in their own yards planting trees. We cannot increase the canopy unless we have people plant trees in their front and side yards as well. So we decided to offer Bareroot trees to the general public with a small markup on the cost to cover our time, and we thought that people might be excited to buy such a big tree for a small amount of money. So we put this in our coming events brochure that gets mailed out to about 1,000 people or more, and we had the order forms here at the center for people to come and pick up. And along with selling 63 trees the first time around to the public, and we had a few groups that also bought trees, we invited them to come to our workshop, and we taught them how to plant the trees, how to take care of the trees, and it was a great opportunity to engage people who may not have been familiar with our center or with trees in particular, to learn a little more about trees and why they're so important. And we coordinated this workshop with the pickup time for them to come and pick up the trees. So the spring of 2008, we planted trees in a park-like area that is a traffic island in the city, and it's also adjacent to a very nice little park area. So we planted 24 trees there, and we had a pretty good survival rate of 20.5 trees. And I think the reason why we had such a better survival rate here is that we also arranged for watering of these trees because it's not easily accessible for volunteer watering. But it's also an area that does not get a lot of foot traffic or vandalism. So I think that was a big factor there. So the last fall, we did a planting at a local school in the city, Nativity Prep, and this was a pretty large campus area which didn't have a lot of trees around the parking lot, has some ball fields with no shade, and also not a lot of trees along the street. So we planted 51 trees here, and the kids all came out on a Saturday to plant the trees, and we had about 60% survival rate. And I think we would have expected a much higher rate because we had a really wet spring this year. They would have been just leafing out this year. But I think we may have made a mistake in our selection of species, and I'll have to look up Nina's list because we found we had a big problem with the ginkgo trees that we planted. And I don't know if they're on the list of trees not to plant Bareroot, but our experience this spring was that they really did not leaf out, and if they did, they kind of leafed out and then gave up. So we will be addressing this with the nursery. We'll talk to them and see what we can do about it, because we did sell some to private individuals who have been calling us, and even though they're not guaranteed, we want to make people happy and we want people to come back and plant more trees. So we'll be working on what to do about that issue. But other than the ginkgos that we planted, I think we did have a pretty good survival rate. This spring, this is with the Urban and Community Forestry Grant. We planted trees at the Riverview Cemetery, which is an urban setting that has been really seriously neglected in the past as far as maintenance goes. And we had the previous spring, we had a big volunteer of local arborists come in and remove a lot of hazardous trees. And so it was appropriate that we come back in and do a big planting of trees. We also got some press coverage from the Friends of the Riverview Cemetery group who had connections to the local newspaper. So we it definitely pays to partner up with different groups to get some publicity and some things moving in your direction. So we planted 61 trees, and 61 survived so far. So we're really happy about that, and we're having a great spring here as far as rain goes. I think it's still raining, so we haven't had to worry too much about watering yet. But what we have found in general is that we have had so many volunteers. We sometimes are afraid that we have too many volunteers for the number of trees that we're planting. And so what we need to do is really get funding to plant more trees so that we can utilize all these volunteers and keep them busy and happy doing the work that we need to do. And it seems like people find that planting trees is fun and rewarding, and they ask us again and again, when can we do more? So that's probably one of the downfalls of the Bareroot trees is you can pretty much only do it during the early spring or late fall. And as far as the sales to the public, this is a copy of our order form. Last year we included the actual order form in our coming events just to make it easier for people to order. And we also put it on our website, and we put links to descriptions and pictures of the trees so people could, go shopping online to see what these trees will look like. Generally, we just choose 10 varieties of trees and have 5 of them be smaller trees and 5 of them be the larger canopy trees. And as you can see, we've had a pretty consistent interest in buying the trees. So we do mark them up a little bit to cover our time and also to help purchase other trees, because sometimes the trees have to be purchased in bunches of 5 or 10. So if you have somebody order 1, obviously, we need to find places for the other 4. So that's been working pretty well for us. And in conclusion, I just want to say that I think one of the best things about the Bareroot trees is the opportunity to interest people and educate them about the importance of tree planting. I think that our survival rates will improve as we learn more about how we should be following up on them and choosing locations that are appropriate, and as well as educating whoever is maintaining the areas. But I think in general, I'm not sure that it would have been that much different, as I said, if they were B&B. But I think larger trees might have been able to withstand a little more vandalism. And just to answer one of the questions that may be occurring to people, we do stake our trees, and the reason for that is maybe the trees would be okay standing by themselves if they're in an area where they're not going to be subject to people tampering with them, or weed whackers or lawnmowers. But we're working in a highly urban area where there's a lot of people around, and maintenance crews that aren't necessarily paying attention. So the stakes perform as much as kind of a barrier, like there's a tree here, don't run into it, kind of indicator, and that's why we do that. And it is actually an added expense, and it's also a maintenance issue that we have to follow up on and make sure that the arbor ties and the stakes are removed when the tree is a little bit bigger and able to withstand. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice. It was great to hear follow-up to Nina's really interesting points with a perspective from how it works on the ground out on the streets of Wilmington. What we're going to do again is open the floor up for questions, and Lori, the operator, will instruct us again on that, just as a reminder.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to ask your questions, please press star then 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please be sure to unmute your phone and record your name when prompted. If you need to withdraw that request, you press star 2. Once again, it's just star then 1. So we have had someone waiting patiently in the queue. We have Keith Warren.
Okay.
Your line is open, Keith.
Oh, well, I had a question. Actually, it was a question during Nina's presentation, if Nina's still there, about storage of trees to do this on a more wide-scale basis in cities. Different species need to be dug at different times in the fall. To make the planting practical, have you looked at any methods of storing trees for a period of a month or 2 before planting?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. We typically get the trees, in about the second week of November, and for our climate, we really need to get them in the ground by the end of November. So we don't want to store them for very long. But in the past, before we dipped them back, we did put them in cool sheds and put straw on the roots and watered them in. Just kept them, but that was, really kind of difficult to keep them wet. So we didn't have any kind of dedicated storage facility. So that's where the bags came in handy, because at least the roots were taken care of. So there are nurseries that have much more, dedicated storage facilities. But for the city's standpoint, they could just about keep them in a shed with the roots being moist.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions in queue?
No, sir, I have no further questions at this time.
All right, well then we have a question from Alice Ewan Walker, the director of the Alliance for Community Trees. Alice?
Hi, Patrice.
Hi, Alice.
One of the things that I've seen in this is that the potential to plant a lot of trees seems to depend on deploying volunteers in a short time frame. And I'm wondering if you observed much difference as you were training volunteers in planting trees correctly between the B&B stock versus the Bareroot stock. Was there much difference in either their success at planting the tree properly, or were there any differences in what kind of training you needed to provide to them?
Well, I think the key is the training, and personally, I have done plantings with volunteers using B&B, and the problem really with doing that is that the trees are just so huge and difficult for people to maneuver properly. And then again, you have the issue of, were they too deep in the nursery, and where's the root flare, and that kind of thing with the B&B stock. But I think, in general, I think that planting the Bareroot trees is much easier, and people feel a better sense of accomplishment planting the Bareroot because they can just do it better and more successful. But apart from, the training session and the demonstration, I think to have group leaders who are knowledgeable is the main thing. Obviously, one person can't be everywhere looking at every tree, so you have to rely on that group leader to make sure. And we do follow up and check them at the end of the day, too, when we're doing our cleanup. But in general, I think people, it's not really rocket science. It's not all that hard, and people do a good job. And we have people of all ages. We have family groups with little kids and older people, and just all kinds of people are interested in planting the Bareroot trees. And as a leader of these volunteers, I don't feel as anxious as when they're planting the B&B trees, because I feel somebody might get hurt when they're trying to do that.
Great, thank you. Lori, are there any questions in the queue?
No, sir, there sure's not.
All right, well then I'd like to ask one that was written in. This is from Laura Jull. She wonders if you're familiar with the Missouri gravel bed system. Chris Starbuck at University of Missouri has this system of bare rooting full leafed out trees, holding them in a gravel bed with irrigation and planting them in full leaf in the middle of the summer without any losses. And we're wondering if you've heard about that and any experience with that.
Wow, I have not heard about it, but I'm interested.
Okay.
Yeah, I've heard about it. I've seen several presentations, and I just wonder why take these Bareroot trees and put them in a gravel bed where you can just plant them right away when they're dormant. And so it seems like an extra step that might not be necessary. The big issue for us is we have to get the species right. So and I think maybe Patrice, looking at some of your lists, you have very difficult species. So in the booklet that's online that I mentioned, there are lists of those that have been successful, those that have been difficult, those that have been really difficult. And ginkgo is a really difficult. We never would do ginkgo. So I'm not sure if the Missouri gravel bed gets around that issue, but for us, we get 90-95% success using the right species, just going right into the ground. So the extra step of the Missouri gravel bed seems like a big extra step.
Okay, thank you. We've got one question that I've heard from a lot of people, and they're wondering about what the recommended depths and widths are for the holes to put the trees in.
Well, you want to at least accommodate the whole root system. And so we want to go generally beyond the existing root system, maybe another halfway, so that we're preparing soil that roots can get into very easily after they start to grow. So basically, the depth would be, again, the root system has a depth to it, so you don't want to plant it too deep. You want to plant it as if it were growing in the nursery. So we look at the root system. We look at where the soil met the
any other questions in queue?
No, sir. I would like to give one more reminder. To ask your questions, please press star then one on your touch-tone phone.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating and for your questions. If you have more questions, please feel free to get in touch with Patrice or Nina. Their information was up on the slides. These presentations are recorded, and this session will be recorded, and the resource list will be available in about a week. We will have a survey that we hope everyone will complete. Should be coming up right there. There's the link in front of you in your slide. When you complete that survey, we will be able to send out the resource list and the recorded session to you. Our next webcast session is July 16th. It's the follow-up to this. It's called Urban Landscaping Part 2, Tree Stock. This is a presentation by the Alliance for Community Trees. I want to thank Nina Bassick and Patrice Jan for their very interesting presentations, to all the participants who were here on this call today, and also to the USDA Forest Service and the Home Depot Foundation. Thank you very much, everybody.
This does conclude today's conference. Thank you for joining, and you may disconnect.